Hi there, welcome to IndyCar on, what is it today? What is it today anyway? The 22nd today? Yeah, goodness me. No, I'm telling lies, I beg your pardon. Yeah, it's the 22nd, sorry, the 22nd of July. This is going to be rather a busy program, so I need you to stick with me here. A lot of things are happening in the background which you don't know about, and I need to keep you up to date upon. The first thing I wanted to mention is that I was contacted this morning by my television editor for the Roku pay-as-you-go TV network, who was telling me that Facebook had denied him access to the IndyCar video archives, which he uses to upload my daily content onto the TV channel. So it looks as if, not content with removing everybody's notifications for the program, in other words, trying to deny the show its live viewer numbers, we've also now got sabotage happening within Facebook with regards to uploading content to other platforms. So it looks like Nick Clegg and his UK spooks have been very busy trying to undermine the whole IndyCar outfit. However, it hasn't worked because I have just installed some new links for my editor, and he can now get access to the archives as normal. So it hasn't worked, Nick, and you keep trying these things and we keep fixing them, so you might as well give up on it. But while I'm on the subject of TV channels, there is an idea afoot at the moment, which I have discussed with some other important figures in the independence movement. And as you know, Scotland is the only country probably in Europe which does not have a free press. We have a propagandist. We have no TV channels of our own, no radio channels of our own, and no way of getting accurate and unbiased information to the public, which is something which we desperately need. However, there is a way that we can do this, and this has happened many times with countries which have been occupied by foreign powers, who were denied the ability to hear accurate news and truthful information by the occupiers, who basically move in and simply take over the entire media and shut down any form of protest. Now, one of the biggest problems for Scotland at the moment is the fact that people are kept in the dark, that the people of Scotland are kept in a sort of limbo of not being certain whether they can have an independence referendum or not being certain whether they're sovereign or not, basically not being sure of anything. And this, of course, is exactly what the propaganda was designed to do. And for the last 315 years, the entire country has been gaslit by the United Kingdom into thinking that there was no way out of the Union. Now, there are many ways out of the Union, which I've talked about in the past, but the problem at the moment for the independence movement is it has no effective media outlet, certainly no television channel, and that is something I intended to fix. Now, as you know, I have made attempts in the past, and mentioning Roku to you is one of those attempts, to get accurate information onto regular television platforms. However, online television platforms can also be interfered with, as we discovered yesterday. So what to do about it? Well, there is another way. And in many countries which are occupied, which have no free media, they simply set up what you might call a media in exile. In other words, they set up TV stations in neighbouring countries which can broadcast, because radio waves don't stop at borders, directly into the country which is being blacked out by the occupiers. Now, this kind of technique has been used in World War II, it's been used in the Cold War, and it can still be used now. There's nothing to stop us going to, say, a European Union major broadcaster and asking to basically upload new programming to a special Scottish channel, which can be broadcast all over Europe and, of course, into the UK, where it can be picked up on terrestrial television. And we have, at the moment, been formulating a plan to do this. This is in its early stages at the moment, but it looks like it's feasible, and we have enough allies within the European Union who are prepared to help us to do it. In the past, in the 1960s, there was once a pirate radio station in Scotland called Radio Free Scotland, which was basically an illegal radio transmitter in the back of a baker's van, which drove around Scotland trying to avoid detector vans and avoid detection by the British shall we say, the British authorities. However, that, although it was interesting and a piece of our history, is not good enough for the 21st century. So what I'm proposing is a major new Scottish television channel transmitting from a nearby continental or other provider from outside of the UK broadcasting into Scotland. And this is something which the BBC would be powerless to stop, especially with satellite channels available to everyone. So I'll keep you updated on the progress of this idea, but I think it's essential that we have a free press, well, not a free press, but a free media at the very least. We can do very little about the newspaper industry in Scotland, but we certainly can do something about the lack of television coverage. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But moving on to more current things today, and if you read the front of the National today, you'll see a quotation attributed to I was going to say the presidential hopeful, but basically Liz Truss, the woman who appears now to have extended a mysterious lead over the favourite in the race to become the new Tory leader. So Liz Truss is now odds-on favourite to beat Rishi Sunak. But Ms Truss is attributed, this comment of Liz Truss's, which is quoted on the front page of the National, says that Ms Truss believes in using referendums to decide major issues in the United Kingdom. Of course, not in Scotland, but this is what she believes in. She believes in using referendums to decide major issues of national importance. But of course, it won't apply in Scotland because we are not a country, according to the Tories. Now, interestingly, in discussions with other major, shall we say, major figures in the independence movement, especially last night, a very long discussion with one in particular, it's emerged that Scotland actually already has a written constitution, and this is a fact which almost the entire population of Scotland is unaware of. Back in 1689, before the Acts of Union were even written, and before the Treaty of Union was written, Scottish negotiators who knew that the writing was on the wall and that the English army was banging on the doors at the border and that we were about to be blockaded by the English Navy and so on, made a very interesting move, and that was they took the existing constitutional document, which is the 1320 Declaration of Arbroath, which states that Scotland is an independent country where the people are sovereign and have the right to depose any king or any other government or force which attempts to rule them and subverts their rights and freedoms under their constitutional arrangement, which was the document of 1320. Now, interestingly, many people in Scotland will say, particularly people my age who grew up in the 70s, that we've always grown up with a feeling that there's something wrong with Scotland, but we don't know what it is. And this feeling of cognitive dissonance is common amongst most of the population of Scotland. And then there's this issue of why is Scotland such a socialist-leaning country when the rest of the United Kingdom is so far to the right? And the reason for that is that Scotland was set up as a nation as the very first democratic state in the world. And that is what the Declaration of Arbroath proclaimed, that Scotland's people were in charge of the country. And Scotland's people had the right to get rid of any rulers they didn't like, even kings, queens, anybody that they didn't like who was subverting their rights under their own constitution. So what was happening in 1689 was the legal experts in Scotland at the time, realising that they were about to be subsumed by an all-powerful England, realised that they had to do something to protect the rights of the Scottish people. So what they did was they wrote the Claim of Right, which is what, as we know it, is a document which guarantees our right to the form of government which best suits our needs. That's the condensed version of it, but it went far, far further than that. Scotland, unbeknownst to most of us, had a flourishing democratic political system well before the Union ever was even thought of. And in that system, all the people were represented at different levels of society by different bodies. For example, the common people were represented by the local authorities, their local boroughs, if you like. And in these local assemblies, they could decide on taxation, they could decide on local laws, and the people who basically ran those boroughs were the senior officials of the towns that the people lived in. And then there were then there were even more layers than that. And it went all the way up, eventually to the parliamentarians themselves. So everybody in Scotland was represented at some level in Scotland's basically a nascent democracy. As we know it now, Scotland was a socialist democracy way back in the 1200s. And it had stayed like that all the way up until the Acts of Union were signed. Anyway, these nobles realised that the 1320 Declaration needed to be codified. In other words, it needed to be written into Scottish law so that it became a statute right. And that is what the Claim of Right did. It gave every citizen in Scotland certain inalienable rights to freedom of speech, to food, to work, to education, and all of the things that we currently expect to have in a modern democracy. These were all guaranteed in the Claim of Right. Interestingly, at the end of every parliament in those days in Scotland, people of all levels of society, all the way down to candle makers and farmers, had the right at the end of each Scottish Parliament to sue the government for any legislation which they felt subverted or encroached on these rights. And this was known as the right of salvo, which is the shortened version of the Latin name for this. So Scotland had a unique system in place already before the Acts of Union were signed. So by writing this into law under this new piece of legislation known as the Claim of Right, it meant that Scotland had and still has a legal constitution, and the rights of individuals in Scotland as sovereign citizens are still guaranteed by it. That means that no Scottish citizen, even today, is a subject of the British monarchy, and it also means that no Scottish citizen can be overruled by Westminster sovereignty. In England, sovereignty was transferred from the Crown to the Parliament. Now, by doing so, when England did that, this is after the Union, incidentally, but when England did that, they basically broke the Act of Union. They broke the treaty because they were basically saying that Scotland was now subservient to Westminster, which goes directly against Scotland's written legal constitution. So therefore, the sovereignty of Westminster is illegal in Scotland. But not only that, it's not the only thing that's illegal in Scotland. The Supreme Court, which is apparently meeting to decide whether or not we are allowed to vote about this, is also illegal under Scottish law, because the highest court in Scotland, under our own constitution, is still the Court of Session's Inner House. And it is that court in Scotland which is supreme. Any attempt, even by populating the Supreme Court in England with Scottish judges, and even saying that they're going to apply Scottish law to this, doesn't make it legal. No decision taken in an English court can subvert Scots law. So that means that whatever is decided in the Supreme Court is utterly irrelevant to Scotland. And so we are all guaranteed still the right to self-determination and the fact that we are sovereign over our leaders. We are the ones who tell our politicians what they can and can't do, and we have the power to depose any politician who doesn't do that. Now, the other interesting ramification of this fact is that the Scottish Parliament, as it's currently constituted, is a creature of the Westminster Parliament. In other words, Scotland's Holyrood Parliament is not sovereign. It cannot make decisions on the Constitution of the United Kingdom simply because it is an arm of Westminster government acting in Scotland. It's the Scottish branch executive of the British government in Scotland. And therefore, with the best will in the world, we cannot say that the SNP government in Scotland can act to hold the referendum, because it simply is still a part of the United Kingdom. It's the United Kingdom's devolved parliament. Now, this is where it gets complicated. The Scottish government, the SNP government, has demonstrated for the last 3 terms that they have been in office that Scotland has politicians of the calibre necessary to be an independent state with a competent government to run it. And that is the major achievement of the SNP over the last 3 terms, is to demonstrate to the people of Scotland that we can have a competent, steady government which is capable of running the country on a fixed minor budget, a fraction of what it actually earns. Now, that is a huge achievement. The fact that the SNP can run the country on the pocket money that it gets from the Westminster system is a hell of an achievement. But it doesn't sort out the problem that Westminster is not sovereign here. And the Scottish Parliament is not sovereign either, because it's an arm of Westminster. In order for the Scottish Parliament to be legitimate, it needs to revert back to using Scottish law to decide these things. Now, so I mentioned that the Supreme Court is illegal, and Scotland has a codified written constitution which is entirely separate from the United Kingdom's. Scotland's constitution is effectively a socialist democracy, and that's why so many of us feel this jarring incongruence between what is done in London and in Westminster on our behalf and what we actually want to have happen up here. There is a deep unease amongst the people of Scotland because we know that this is not the way Scotland should be run, and it's not the way that our democratic system was originally set up. So what can we do? Well, the simple fact is that when, and it's not a case of if, when the referendum is ruled illegal by the illegal Supreme Court in England under the illegally sovereign Westminster, there is no other door open to us under that system. We would be basically saying that we accept Westminster's overlordship and dominion over us forever and that we can't escape. And obviously that is not tenable. So the only way out for that really is, once all of these doors have slammed shut, and they will slam shut, we have to have our own laws brought into force, and we have to basically publish our unknown constitution, the one which has been buried for 315 years by these 3 centuries of propaganda coming from London, which have basically gaslit the Scots into believing that they're stuck here, but they're not. It is simple enough for the Scottish Parliament to basically dissolve itself if the majority Scottish government, including the SNP and the Greens, were basically to say that they no longer believe that this Westminster arm of government in Scotland was sufficient to our needs, or was suitable to our needs, and they declared that the Union was suspended pending a gathering of all of Scotland's elected officials. Now this is the equivalent, the modern equivalent, of the 3 estates of Scotland meeting in its own parliament, using its own laws to make a decision, because this is the only way out for Scotland, really, under its legal constitution. Now, the other thing that's important to remember here is that Nicola Sturgeon has said many times that it is the people of Scotland who must decide whether Scotland becomes independent, not the politicians. Now, that means that when the politicians have done their best to achieve a referendum and failed, and have done their best to achieve a result at a general election and been told it's not going to happen, then there has to be a way through that. And what Nicola Sturgeon means is that when all these doors are closed, then the people of Scotland have to act together and have to reconvene their own parliament under their own laws and their own legislation and their own constitution, to debate it and to decide to end the Union in that way, because we have a majority in the Scottish Parliament which doesn't have powers. If we disband that cuckoo in the nest political system that was planted here by Westminster parties, then we can reconstitute our original parliament. Now, to do that, we would need to contact the United Nations and tell them that that's what we were going to do, and to seek their agreement that whatever we decided in that parliament, that they would respect it, because it is the only possible democratic route out for Scotland at the end of this enormously long waiting period while we go through all of the burning hoops that the British government has set out for us to jump through. So there has to be a reckoning, and the reckoning has to be democratic, and it has to involve the people of Scotland, who are ultimately the sovereign people. Now, because of this, and because of Scotland's unique constitution, the constitution needs to be published and widely spread so that people understand what it is that's happening. Because we know that the Unionists will try and paint this as some kind of illegal coup, which it isn't, and they will try to tell you that when the Union Treaty was signed and when the Acts of Union were signed, that they extinguished Scotland as a country. This never happened, incidentally. The English government assumed that it was was extinguishing Scotland, but it neglected to do anything about the claim of right. And this is the reason why the SNP has repeatedly mentioned the claim of right in Westminster. It's to remind Westminster that Scotland still holds this constitution and that it will use it as the ultimate escape clause to get out of the Union. So the British government knows that the clock is ticking and that this last final opportunity to leave the Union will be used eventually. The problem at the moment is that we are now locked into a spiral of wait and see, with an illegal court in England, with an illegally sovereign parliament in Westminster, which has no control over the Scottish people at all. It's technically illegal. It's not just technically, it's morally illegal, and it's legally illegal. Let's put it this way. It's very simple. The Scottish Constitution guarantees the rights and the freedoms of the people of Scotland in all aspects. They lend that power to their politicians to act for them. If the politicians are not acting for them or are in any way subverting those rights and those freedoms, then we are free to get rid of that government. And that means getting rid, incidentally, of Holyrood and its I would almost classify it as a Vichy parliament. It's an insertion into our own political system by a foreign occupier. By doing this, we need also to form a people's delegation. It cannot be politicians. It has to be an organisation in which millions of Scots have signed up to it, and in which this delegation goes to, first of all, the European Court of Human Rights. It goes to the highest court in Europe, and also goes to the United Nations to say that Scotland is in this position and that it is taking back control of its parliament and that it is invoking its own constitution in order to settle the matter. And that will be enough, because under international law, whatever the law of the nation is, which is seeking to settle a matter of international treaty, then by going to the United Nations and representing all of the people, or the majority of the people who want this to be done, then it doesn't matter what the politicians say, because we would be recognised then as the representatives of the people. And we are the sovereign people. So whoever we decide to send over there, they are our representatives. They are our ambassadors, if you like. So it's a very interesting situation, and this is why the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group is holding this conference on the 29th, the 30th and the 31st of this month. And this is the point. The point is that there is a way out of this. The point is that there is a written constitution already in existence. It's already in black and white. It's on the statutes of Scotland. It was never repealed. And because the legal systems of Scotland and England are guaranteed under the Acts of Union, no Supreme Court in England can rule against it. And no Westminster government can rule it unlawful, because the two legal systems are mutually incompatible and always have been for 315 years, in fact more than that. So what I'm telling you here, everyone, is that it doesn't matter about the referendum, it doesn't matter about the general election, and it doesn't matter whether all the doors are closed by Westminster and making it apparently illegal. It's never been illegal. It's always been our lawful right as Scots citizens, not subjects, to do whatever we wish, and that is everybody's right. And that's the reason why people feel so trapped. It's the reason why everyone feels so confused, and it's the reason why we always have this deep-rooted feeling that something is badly wrong somewhere in Scotland. And the reason is something is badly wrong. Our rights as individuals have been airbrushed out of existence by a British propaganda machine for 3 centuries. It's very hard for people who have been mentally conditioned to believe something for 3 centuries to wake up and realise that the entire thing was a lie. But it was a lie. And that's why no matter what happens with the Supreme Court, it doesn't make any difference to Scots. We are always sovereign. We have been since 1320. We were even before that constitutional document was sent to the Pope in 1320. And therefore, Scotland is the oldest independent state in Europe, and it's probably the oldest and first democracy in the world. and it still is a complete social democracy. And that's the reason why we feel the way we do, and that's the reason why the United Nations will recognise Scotland when it invokes its own constitution. I hope that I know it's been a lengthy explanation because it's complicated. But the two things I want you to remember are that the 1320 Declaration of Arbroath founded the country as a democratic state where the people are sovereign, and the Claim of Right codified that and converted it into a Scottish law. It became a statute, and it is the right of every Scot who lives here to those rights to freedom of speech, to freedom of thought, and to all the other rights and all the other freedoms which that conferred on us. And none of that has ever changed. We always had the rights, and we still have them. It's still on the statute books. The Scottish Government could dissolve itself and declare that the devolved administration of Scotland is illegal and is no longer the lawful representatives of the people. And that's basically it. There's a lot to be done here, and the SNP have done the heavy lifting on this, and they're continuing to try and find a democratic route out, but I know that they can't do it because the British state will never allow it, because the British state makes the rules up and changes them constantly to suit themselves, and that's because they can do that because they don't have a constitution, and they believe that they have a divine right to rule over us, and they believe that their crown is basically has given its power to parliamentarians. Parliamentarians can't be touched. They can't be arrested while they're in Parliament. They can't be charged with a crime. They are above the law. They are more powerful than the Queen. The Queen is basically just a part of their apparatus of power. And it doesn't matter who we elect in Westminster. It's still the same people. It's still the same system. And we couldn't get rid of it as long as we accept that they rule over us. And they don't. So let's get rid of this notion that we're subjects of the United Kingdom. Nobody in Scotland is a subject. Every Scot is a citizen, and every Scot is sovereign. And that can't be changed by Westminster or anyone else in the United Kingdom. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.